जय गुरु जी संगत, जय गुरु जी। शुक्राना गुरु जी महाराज फॉर दिस सेवा। शुक्राना गुरु जी महाराज multilingual group for giving me this opportunity of this seva of reading of the autobiography of a yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda in language English. जय गुरु जी, जय गुरु जी, जय गुरु जी। बहुत बहुत शुक्राना गुरु जी। गुरु जी, please be with me as I read this beautiful biography of a yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. We all know that Guruji had always recommended reading of this book, and I'm sure just as we read it together, we will together discover many secrets of the pearls of wisdom lying in this book. Taking the holy name of our beloved Father, Guruji, let us start. Jai Guruji, Jai Guruji. The spiritual legacy of Sri Sri Paramahansa Yogananda, his complete writings, lectures, and informal talks. Paramahansa Yogananda founded Yogoda Satsanga Society of India YSS in 1917 and Self-Realization Fellowship SRF in 1920 to disseminate his teachings worldwide and to preserve their purity and integrity for generations to come. A prolific writer and lecturer from his earliest years in America, he created a renowned and voluminous body of works on the yoga science of meditation, the art of balanced living, and the underlying unity of all great religions. Today, this unique and far-reaching spiritual legacy lives on, inspiring millions of truth seekers all over the world. In accord with the express wishes of the great Guru, Yogoda Satsanga Society of India, Self-Realization Fellowship has continued the ongoing task of publishing and keeping permanently in print the complete works of Paramahansa Yogananda. These include not only the final editions of all the books he published during his lifetime, but also many new titles, works that had remained unpublished at the time of his passing in 1952, or which had been serialized over the years in incomplete form in Yogoda Satsanga Society of India Self-Realization Fellowships magazine, as well as hundreds of profoundly inspiring lectures and informal talks recorded but not printed before his passing. Paramahansa Yogananda personally chose and trained those close disciples who have headed the Yogoda Satsanga Society of India Self-Realization Fellowship Publications Council since his passing, and gave them specific guidelines for the preparation and publishing of his teachings. The members of the YSS SRF Publications Council, monks and nuns who have taken lifelong vows of renunciation and selfless service, honor these guidelines as a sacred trust in order that the universal message of this beloved world teacher will live on in its original power and authenticity. The Yogoda Satsanga Society of India Self-Realization Fellowship emblem shown on the previous page was designated by the Paramhansa Yogananda to identify the non-profit society he founded as the authorized source of his teachings. The YSS SRF name and emblem appear on all YSS SRF publications and recordings, assuring the reader that a work originates with the organization founded by Paramahansa Yogananda and conveys his teachings as he himself intended they be given. Offered onto the divine hands of Sri Sri Swami Sri Yukteswar Giri Maharaj, my blessed, adored and worshipful Gurudeva. Author's acknowledgements, that is by Paramahansa Yogananda, written on October 28, 1945. I am deeply indebted to Miss L.V. Prath, Taramata, for her long editorial labors over the manuscript of this book. My thanks are due also to Mr. C. Richard Wright for permission to use extracts from his Indian travel diary, to Dr. W.Y. Evans Vance. I'm grateful not only for his preface, but also for his suggestions and encouragement. Preface by W.Y. Evans Vance, author and translator of many classic works on yoga and the wisdom traditions of the East, including Tibetan yoga and secret doctrines, Tibet's great yogi Milarepa, and the Tibetan Book of the Dead. The value of Yogananda's autobiography is greatly enhanced by the fact that it is one of the few books in English about the wise men of India, which have been written not only by a journalist or a foreigner, but by one of their own race and training. In short, a book about yogis by a yogi. As an eyewitness recountal of the extraordinary lives and powers of modern Hindu saints, the book has importance both timely and timeless. To its illustrious author, whom I've had the pleasure of knowing in both India and America, may every reader render due appreciation and gratitude. His unusual life document is certainly one of the most revealing of the depths of Hindu mind and heart, and of the spiritual wealth of India ever to be published in the West. It has been my privilege to meet one of the sages whose life history is herein narrated, Sri Yukteswar Giri. A likeness of the venerable saint appeared as part of the frontispiece of my Tibetan yoga and secret doctrines. It was at Puri in Orissa on the Bay of Bengal that I encountered Sri Yukteswar. He was then the head of a quiet ashram near the seashore there, and was chiefly occupied in the spiritual training of a group of youthful disciples. He expressed keen interest in the welfare of the people of the United States and of all the Americas and of England too, and questioned me concerning the distant activities, particularly those in California, of his chief disciple Paramahansa Yogananda, whom he dearly loved, and whom he had sent in 1920 as his emissary to the West. Sri Yukteswar was of gentle mien and voice, of pleasing presence, and worthy of the veneration that his followers spontaneously accorded to him. Every person who knew him, whether of his own community or not, held him in the highest esteem. I vividly recall his tall, straight, ascetic figure robed in the saffron-colored garb of one who has renounced worldly quests, as he stood at the entrance of the hermitage to give me welcome. His hair was long and somewhat curly, and his face bearded. His body was muscularly firm, but slender and well-formed, and his step energetic. He had chosen as his place of earthly abode the holy city of Puri, with the multitudes of pious Hindus, representative of every province of India, come daily on pilgrimage to the famed temple of Jagannath, Lord of the world. It was at Puri that Sri Yukteswar closed his mortal eyes in 1936 to the scenes of this transitory state of being and passed on, knowing his incarnation had been carried to a triumphant completion. I am glad indeed to be able to record this testimony to the high character and holiness of Sri Yukteswar. Content to remain afar from the multitude, he gave himself unreservedly and in tranquility to that ideal life which Paramahansa Yogananda, his disciple, has now described for ages. Introduction. The experience of meeting Paramahansa Yogananda is etched in my memory, writes Dr. Binay R. Sen, former ambassador of India to United States. The experience of meeting Paramahansa Yogananda is etched in my memory as one of the unforgettable events of my life. As I looked into his face, my eyes were almost dazzled by a radiance, a light of spirituality that literally shone from him. His infinite gentleness, his gracious kindliness enveloped me like warm sunshine. I could see that his understanding and insight extended to the most mundane of problems, even though he was a man of spirit. In him, I found a true ambassador of India, carrying and spreading the essence of India's ancient wisdom to the world. To those who are personally acquainted with Paramahansa Yogananda, his own life and being were convincing testimony to the power and authenticity of the ancient wisdom he presented to the world. Countless readers of the autobiography have attested to the presence in its pages of that same light of spiritual authority that radiated from his person. Hailed as a masterpiece when it appeared in print more than 60 years ago, the book set forth not only the story of a life of unmistakable greatness, but a fascinating introduction to the spiritual thought of the East, especially its unique signs of direct personal communion with God, opening up to the Western public a realm of knowledge hitherto accessible only to few. Today, Autobiography of a Yogi is recognized around the world as a classic of spiritual literature. In this introduction, we would like to share some of the book's introduction, Extraordinary History. The writing of the work had been prophesied long ago. One of the seminal figures in the renaissance of yoga in modern times, the revered 19th century master, Lahiri Mahasaya, had foretold, about 50 years after my passing, an account of my life will be written because of a deep interest in yoga that will arise in the West. The message of yoga will encircle the globe. It will aid in establishing the brotherhood of man, a unity based on humanity's direct perception of one Father. Many years later, Lahiri Mahasaya's exalted disciple, Swami Sri Yukteswar, related this prophecy to Sri Yogananda. You must do your part in spreading that message, he declared, and in writing that sacred life. It was in 1945, exactly 50 years after Lahiri Mahasaya's passing, that Paramahansa Yogananda completed his autobiography of a yogi, which amply fulfilled both of his guru's injunctions, providing the first detailed presentation in English of Lahiri Mahasaya's remarkable life and introducing to a world audience India's age-old science of the soul. Now we will move to first chapter of autobiography of a yogi. Jai Guruji, please help me read and reach out in the best possible manner that your devotees, your listeners get to benefit from it and understand the underlying message that this biography conveys and the reason why you have always during your lifetime advised your devotees to read this book. Here goes chapter 1, My Parents and Early Life. The characteristic features of Indian culture have long been a search for ultimate verities and the concomitant disciple-guru relationship. I like to repeat this line. The characteristic features of Indian culture have long been a search for ultimate verities and the concomitant disciple-guru relationship. My own path led to Christ-like sage. His beautiful life was chiseled for the ages. He was one of the great masters who are India's truest wealth. Emerging in every generation, they have bulwarked their land against the fate of ancient Egypt and Babylonia. I find my earliest memories covering the anachronistic features of a previous incarnation. Clear recollections came to me of a distant life in which I had been a yogi amid the Himalayan snows. These glimpses of the past, by some dimensionless link, also afforded me a glimpse of the future. I still remember the helpless humiliations of infancy. I was resentfully conscious of being unable to walk and to express myself freely. Prayerful surges arose within me as I realized my bodily impotence. My strong emotional life was mentally expressed in words of many languages. Amid the inward confusion of tongues, I gradually became accustomed to hearing the Bengali syllables of my people. The beguiling scope of an infant's mind, adultly considered to be limited to toys and toes. Psychological ferment and my unresponsive body brought me so many obstinate crying spells. I recall the general family bewilderment at my distress. Happier memories too crowd in on me. My mother's caresses and my first attempts at lisping phrase and toddling step. These early triumphs, usually forgotten quickly, are yet a natural basis of self confidence. My far searching memories are not unique. Are known to have Many yogis are known to have retained their self consciousness without interruption by the dramatic transition to and from life and death. If man be solely a body, its loss indeed ends his identity. But if prophets down the millennium spake with truth, man is essentially a soul, incorporeal and omnipresent. Although odd, clear memories of infancy are not extremely rare. During travels in numerous lands, I've heard very early recollections from the lips of veracious men and women. I was born on January 5, 1893, in Gorakhpur, in northeastern India near the Himalaya mountains. There, my first 8 years were passed. We were 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls. Mukanda Lal Ghosh was the second son and the fourth child. Father and mother were Bengalis of the Kshatriya caste. Both were blessed with both were blessed with saintly nature. Their mutual love, tranquil and dignified, never expressed itself frivolously. A perfect parental harmony was the calm center for the revolving tumult of 8 young lives. Father Bhagavati Charan Ghosh was kind, grave at times, stern. Loving him dearly as children, yet observed a certain reverential distance. An outstanding mathematician and logician, he was guided principally by his intellect. But mother was a queen of hearts and taught us only through love. After her death, father displayed more of her inner tenderness. I noticed then that his gaze often seemed to be metamorphosed onto my mother's gaze. In mother's presence, we children made an early bittersweet acquaintance with the scriptures. Mother would resourcefully summon from the Mahabharata and the Ramayana suitable tales to meet the exigencies of the discipline. On these occasions, chastisement and instruction went hand in hand. As a gesture of respect for father, in the afternoons, mother would dress us children carefully to welcome him home from the office. He held a position similar to that of a vice president in one of India's large companies, Bengal Nagpur Railway. His work involved traveling. Our family lived in several cities during my childhood. Mother held an open hand towards the needy. Father was also kindly disposed, but his respect for law and order extended to the budget. One fortnight mother spent in feeding the poor more than father's monthly income. All I ask, please, father said, is that you keep your charities within a reasonable limit. Even a gentle rebuke from her husband was grievous to mother. Not hinting to the children at any disagreement, she ordered a hackney carriage. I'm going away to my mother's home. Ancient ultimatum. We broke into astounded lamentations. Our maternal uncle arrived opportunely. He whispered to father some sage counsel, garnered no doubt from the ages. After father had made a few consolatory remarks, mother happily dismissed the cab. Thus ended the only trouble I ever noticed between my parents. But I recall a characteristic discussion. Please give me 10 rupees for a hapless woman who has just arrived at the house. Mother's smile had its own persuasion. Why 10 rupees? One is enough, father added, a justification. When my father and grandparents died suddenly, I had my first experience of poverty. My only breakfast before walking miles to my school was a small banana. Later at the university, I was in such need that I applied to a wealthy judge for aid of 1 rupee per month. He declined, remarking that even a rupee is important. How bitterly you recall the denial of that rupee. Mother's heart had an instant logic. Do you want this woman also to remember painfully your refusal of 10 rupees, which she needs urgently? You win. With the immemorial gesture of vanquished husbands, he opened his wallet. Here is a 10-rupee note. Give it to her with my goodwill. Father tended first to say no to any new proposal. His attitude towards the stranger, who so readily had won mother's sympathy, was an example of his customary caution. An aversion to instant acceptance is really only honoring the principle of due reflection. I always found father reasonable and evenly balanced in his judgments. If I could bolster up my numerous requests with one or two arguments, he would invariably put within my reach the coveted goal, whether a vacation trip or a new motorcycle. Father was a strict disciplinarian to his children in their early years, but his attitude towards himself was truly Spartan. He never visited the theatre, for instance, but sought his recreation in various spiritual practices and in reading the Bhagavad Gita. Shunning all luxuries, he would cling to one old pair of shoes until they were useless. His sons bought automobiles after they came into popular use, but father was content with a trolley car for his daily ride to the office. Father was not interested in the accumulation of money for the sake of power. On one occasion, after he had organized the Calcutta Urban Bank, he refused to benefit himself by holding any of its shares. He had simply wished to perform a civic duty in his spare time. Several years after father had retired on a pension, an accountant from England came to India to examine the books of Bengal Nagpur Railway. The amazed investigator discovered that father had never applied for overdue bonuses. He did the work of 3 men, the accountant told the company. He has rupees 1,25,000 owing to him as his back compensation. The treasurer sent father a check for that amount. My parent thought so little about the matter that he forgot to mention it to the family. Much later, he was questioned by the youngest brother Vishnu, who had noticed the large deposit on a bank statement. Why be elated by material profit? Father replied. The one who pursues a goal of even-mindedness is neither jubilant with gain nor depressed by loss. He knew that man arrives penniless in this world and departs without a single rupee. How beautiful, Sangatji. I repeat, why be elated by material profit? Father replied. The one who pursues a goal of even-mindedness is neither jubilant with gain nor depressed by loss. He knows that man arrives penniless in this world and departs without a single rupee. Early in their married life, my parents became disciples of a great master, Lahiri Mahasaya of Banaras. This association strengthened father's naturally ascetical temperament. Mother once made a remarkable admission to my eldest sister Roma. Your father and I sleep together as man and wife only once a year for the purpose of having children. Father met Lahiri Mahasaya through Abhinash Babu, an employee of a branch line of Bengal Nagpur Railway. In Gorakhpur, Abhinash Babu instructed my young years with engrossing tales of many Indian saints. He invariably concluded with a tribute to the superior glories of his own guru. Did you ever hear of the extraordinary circumstances under which your father became a disciple of Lahiri Mahasaya? It was on a lazy summer afternoon, as Abhinash and I sat together in the compound of my house, that he put his intriguing questions. I shook my head with a smile of anticipation. Years ago, before you were born, I asked my superior officer, your father, to give me a week's leave from my office duties in order to visit my guru in Banaras. Your father ridiculed my plan. Are you going to become a religious fanatic? He inquired. Concentrate on your office work if you want to forge ahead. Sadly walking home along a woodland path that day, I met your father in a palanquin. He dismissed his servants and conveyance and fell into step beside me. Seeking to console me, he pointed out the advantages of striving for worldly success. But I heard him listlessly. My heart was repeating, Lahiri Mahasaya, I cannot live without seeing you. Our path took us to the edge of tranquil field, where the rays of the late afternoon sun were crowning the tall ripple of the wild grass. We paused in admiration. There in the field, only a few yards from us, the form of my great Guru suddenly appeared. Bhagavati, you are too hard on your employee. His voice was resonant in our astounded ears. He vanished as mysteriously as he had come. On my knees, I was exclaiming, Lahari Mahasaya, Lahari Mahasaya. For a few moments, your father was motionless with stupefaction. Abhinash, not only do I give you leave, but I give myself leave to start for Benares tomorrow. I must know this great Lahiri Mahasaya who is unable to materialize himself at will in order to intercede for you. I will take my wife and ask this master to initiate us in the spiritual path. Will you guide us to him? Of course, joy filled me at the miraculous answer to my prayer and the quick favorable turn of events. The next evening, your parents and I trained for Banaras. Reaching there on the following day, we took a horse cart for some distance, then had to walk through narrow lanes to my Guru's secluded home. Entering his little parlor, we bowed before the master and logged in his habitual lotus posture. He blinked his piercing eyes and leveled them on your father. Bhagavati, you are too hard on your employee. His words were the same as those he had used 2 days before in the grassy field. He added, I am glad that you have permitted Abhinash to visit me and that you and your wife have accompanied him. In their joy, he initiated your parents in the spiritual practice of Kriya Yoga. Your father and I, as brother disciples, have been close friends since the memorable day of the vision. Lahiri Mahasaya took a definite interest in your birth. Your life shall surely be linked with his own. The master's blessings never fail. Lahiri Mahasaya left this world shortly after I had entered it. His picture in an ornate frame always graced our family altar in the various cities to which father was transferred by his office. Many a morning and evening found mother and me meditating before an improvised shrine, offering flowers dipped in fragrant sandalwood paste, with frankincense and myrrh, as well as our united devotions. We honored the divinity and had found full expression in Lahiri Mahasaya. His presence had a surpassing influence over my life. As I grew, the thought of the master grew with me. In meditation, I would often see his photographic image emerge from its small frame and, taking a living form, sit before me. When I attempted to touch the feet of his luminous body, it would change and again become the picture. As childhood slipped into boyhood, I found Lahiri Mahasaya transformed in my mind from a little image cribbed in a frame to a living, enlightening presence. I frequently prayed to him in moments of trial or confusion, finding within me his solacing direction. As first I grieved because he was no longer physical living. As I began to discover his secret omnipresence, I lamented no more. He had often written to those of his disciples who were over anxious to see him, Why come to view my flesh and bones when I am ever within range of your Kutastha, spiritual sight? Why come to view my flesh and bones when I am ever within range of your spiritual sight? At about the age of 8, I was blessed with a wonderful healing through the photograph of Lahiri Mahasaya. This experience gave intensification to my love. While at our family estate in Ichhapur, Bengal, I was stricken with Asiatic cholera. My life was despaired of. The doctors could do nothing. At my bedside, mother frantically motioned me to look at Lahiri Mahasaya's picture on the wall above my head. Bow to him mentally, she knew I was too feeble even to lift my hands in salutation. If you really show your devotion and inwardly kneel before him, your life will be spared. I gazed at his photograph and saw there a blinding light enveloping my body and the entire room. My nausea and other uncontrollable symptoms disappeared. I was well. At once I felt strong enough to bend over and touch mother's feet in appreciation of her immeasurable faith in her Guru. Mother pressed her head repeatedly against the little picture. O omnipresent Master, I thank thee that my light hath healed my son. I realized that she too had witnessed the luminous blaze through which I had instantly recovered from a usually fatal disease. One of my most precious possessions is that same photograph, given to Father by Lahiri Mahasaya himself. It carries holy vibration. The picture had a miraculous origin. I heard the story from Father's brother disciple Kali Kumar Roy. It appears that the master had an aversion to being photographed. Over his protest, a picture was once taken of him and a group of devotees, including Kali Kumar Roy. It was an amazed photographer who discovered that the plate, which had clear images of all the disciples, revealed nothing more than a blank space in the center where he had reasonably expected to find the outlines of Lahiri Mahasaya. The phenomenon was widely discussed. A student who was an expert photographer, Gangadhar Babu, boasted that the fugitive figure would not escape him. The next morning, as the Guru sat in lotus posture on a wooden bench with a screen behind him, Gangadhar Babu arrived with his equipment. Taking every precaution for success, he greedily exposed 12 plates. On each one he soon found the imprint of the wooden bench and screen, but once again the master's form was missing. With tears and shattered pride, Gangadhar Babu sought out his Guru. It was many hours before Lahiri Mahasaya broke his silence with a pregnant comment. I am spirit. Can your camera reflect the omnipresent invisible? I see it cannot, but holy sir, I lovingly desire a picture of your bodily temple. My vision had been narrow until today. I did not realize that in you the spirit fully dwells. Come, then tomorrow morning I will pose for you. Again the photographer focused his camera. This time the sacred figure, not cloaked, with mysterious imperceptibility, was sharp on the plate. The master never posed for another picture. At least I have never seen. The photograph is reproduced in this book. Lahiri Mahasaya's fair features of a universal caste hardly suggest to what race he belonged. The joy of God communion is slightly revealed in his enigmatic smile, his eyes half open to denote a nominal interest in the outer world, are also half closed, indicating his absorption in inner bliss. Oblivious of the poor lures of the earth, he was fully awake at all times to the spiritual problems of seekers who approached for his bounty. Shortly after my healing through the potency of the Guru's picture, I had an influential spiritual vision. Sitting on my head one morning, I fell into a deep reverie. What is behind the darkness of closed eyes? This probing thought came powerfully into my mind. An immense flash of light at once manifested to my inner gaze. Divine shapes of saints sitting in meditation posture in mountain caves formed like miniature cinema pictures on the large screen of a radiance within my forehead. Who are you? I spoke aloud. We are the Himalayan yogis. The celestial response is difficult to describe. My heart was thrilled. Ah! I long to go to the Himalayas and become like you. The vision vanished, but the silvery beams expanded in ever-widening circles to infinity. What is this wondrous glow? I am Ishvara. I am light. The voice was as murmuring clouds. I want to be one with thee. One of the slow dwindling of my passion. One of the slow dwindling of my divine ecstasy. I salvaged a permanent legacy of inspiration to seek God. He is eternal, ever new joy, This memory persisted long after the day of rapture. Another early recollection is outstanding and literally so, for I bear the scar to this day. My elder sister Uma and I were seated in the early morning under a neem tree in our Gorakhpur compound. She was helping me in my study of Bengali primer. What time I could spare my gaze from the nearby parrots eating ripe margosa fruit. Sorry, Sangatji, I have exceeded already 6 minutes, but it is just about 1.5 pages to go. So I take the liberty to complete chapter 1 and take another 5 to 7 minutes. Thanks for your cooperation and apologies if anyone's schedule is disturbed by extension of this reading. Another 5 to 7 minutes, please, as I complete chapter 1. Uma complained of a boil on her leg and fetched a jar of ointment. I smeared a bit of the salve on my forearm. Why do you use medicine on a healthy arm? Well, sis, I feel I'm going to have a boil tomorrow. I'm testing your ointment on the spot where the boil will appear. You little liar. Sis, don't call me a liar until you see what happens in the next morning. Indignation filled me. Uma, unimpressed, thrice repeated her taunt. An adamant resolution sounded in my voice as I made slow reply. By the power of will in me, I say that tomorrow I shall have a fairly large boil in this exact place on my arm, and your boil shall swell to twice its present size. Morning found me a stalwart boil on the indicated spot. The dimensions of Uma's boil had doubled. With the shriek, my sister rushed to mother. Mukunda has become a necromancer. The sister rushed to mother and said, Mukunda has become a necromancer. Gravely, mother instructed me never to use the power of words for doing harm. I have always remembered her counsel and followed it. My boil was surgically treated. A noticeable scar left by the doctor's incision is present today. On my right forearm is constant reminder of the power in man's sheer word. How beautiful, Sangatji! He says, on my right forearm is a constant reminder of the power in man's sheer word. And as that is why it is said, always say good words. And even in Bani it says, changa vadda bole, vadda hoye, right? So these simple and apparently harmless phrases to Uma, spoken with deep concentration, had possessed sufficient hidden force to explode like bombs and to produce definite, though injurious effects. I understood later that the explosive vibratory power in speech could be wisely directed to free one's life from difficulties and thus operate without scar or rebuke. Our family moved to Lahore in the Punjab. There I acquired a picture of the Divine Mother in form of Goddess Kali. It sanctified a small informal shrine on the balcony of our home. An unequivocal conviction came over me that fulfillment would crown any of the prayers uttered in that sacred spot. Standing there with Uma one day, I watched two boys flying kites over the roofs of two buildings that were separated from our house by an extremely narrow lane. Why are you so quiet? Uma pushed me playfully. I am just thinking how wonderful it is that Divine Mother gives me whatever I ask. I suppose she would give you those two kites. My sister laughed derisively. Why not? I began silent prayers for their possession. Matches are played in India with kites whose strings are covered with glue and ground glass. Each player attempts to sever the string held by the opponent. A freed kite sails over the roofs. There is great fun in catching it. As Uma and I were on a roofed recessed balcony, it seemed impossible that a loosed kite could come into our hands. Its string would naturally dangle over the roof. The players across the lane began their match. One string was cut. Immediately the kite floated in my direction. Owing to a sudden abatement of the breeze, the kite remained stationary for a moment, during which its string became firmly entangled with a cactus plant on top of the opposite house. A long, perfect loop was formed for my seizure. I handed the prize to Uma. It was just an extraordinary accident and not an answer to your prayer. If the other kite comes to you, then I shall believe. Sister's dark eyes conveyed more amazement than her words. I continued my prayers with intensity. A forcible tug by the other player resulted in the abrupt loss of his kite. It headed towards me, dancing to the wind. My helpful assistant, how beautifully written, my helpful assistant, the cactus plant, again secured the kite string in the necessary loop by which I could grasp it. I presented my second trophy to Uma. Indeed, Divine Mother listens to you. This is all too uncanny for me. Sister bolted away like a frightened fawn. So that's end of beautiful chapter 1, Sangatji. Thank you to this group, Shukrana Guruji Maharaj Multilingual, for giving me this opportunity to read Autobiography of Yogi. Tomorrow 7:30 p.m. I will be reading chapter 2 by Hukam of Guruji, and I will take half an hour only tomorrow from 7:30 to 8. Thank you very much, Sangatji, for your patient hearing. Thank you to this beautiful group, and thank you, Guruji Maharaj, for this opportunity. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Shukrana. Please forgive me for any kind of mispronunciations. I know we have Sangat here from all parts of the world, and English is one language which is pronounced differently in different parts of the world. So my pronunciation can be wrong also, and my pronunciation can be different from yours also. Please forgive me for saying. Thank you very much. Jai Guruji. Shukrana.